8 seasons, years of theories, endless prophecies, and all for what? For the Night King to end up as the most wasted villain in TV history. And yes, I'm talking about that character who for years was sold to us as the ultimate threat, the end of the world, the Thanos of Westeros, but who in the end turned out to be just a mid-level boss taken out in a matter of minutes. Today we're going to break down how a villain that had everything to be legendary ended up remembered as one of Game of Thrones' biggest narrative mistakes. When we talk about the ending of Game of Thrones, everyone remembers the disappointment. But if there's one part that still stings more than anything else, it's how the Night King's story wrapped up. From the very first season, from that opening prologue with the White Walkers in the snow, the show told us this isn't just a fight for power. There's a much greater threat waiting out there. And sure, while we were watching the houses betray each other, the Lannisters playing political chess, and Daenerys conquering cities, in the background there was always that shadow, that looming threat that was supposed to one day bring everyone together into a single conflict. The Night King wasn't just another villain. He had no ideology. He didn't care about a throne. He was the apocalypse, the end of civilization. And that promise is what kept fans speculating for 8 long years, until the resolution came. Today I want to show you that the Night King wasn't just defeated. He was narratively ruined because, yes, he is without a doubt the most wasted villain in TV history. And to understand why, we need to look at how he was built up, what was promised, and what we ultimately got. The very first scene of Game of Thrones wasn't about the Iron Throne or about the noble houses of Westeros. It was about the White Walkers. That choice wasn't random. It was a signal to the audience. Yes, the politics are interesting, but there's something far bigger, far darker waiting out there beyond the wall. From that moment, the Night King and his army became the silent heartbeat of the entire show. While the Starks and Lannisters were tearing each other apart, the White Walkers were always advancing, slowly, quietly, but relentlessly. And every time they showed up, the series reminded us that these weren't ordinary monsters. They weren't orcs you could hack down or bandits you could bribe. They were unstoppable. They turned death itself into a weapon. The Night King himself was crafted almost like a myth. He didn't speak, he didn't monologue, he just was. And in storytelling, silence can be far scarier than words. Think about how Darth Vader's breathing can terrify more than any speech. The Night King's mere presence was supposed to say, "You cannot stop me, you cannot reason with me, you can't even understand me." And then came the prophecies. Azor Ahai, the prince that was promised, the idea of the long night returning. The fact that Bran, arguably the show's most mysterious character, was directly tied to the Night King made it all feel like one giant puzzle waiting to be solved. Fans theorized endlessly. Was Jon Snow Azor Ahai? Was the Night King Bran in another timeline? Was this a cosmic struggle between fire and ice? Every season, little hints stacked up. The battle at Hardhome, where Jon faced him directly, and the Night King casually raised an entire army with a single gesture. That moment alone skyrocketed expectations. He wasn't just another villain, he was the villain, the ultimate antagonist of the entire saga. When you spend nearly a decade building a villain like this, you don't just raise expectations, you create a promise of a payoff. And that's why the way his story ended felt like such a betrayal. And then the moment finally came. The Battle of Winterfell. Hyped as the biggest event in television history. Weeks of marketing promised a spectacle that would outshine even Hollywood. And visually, it was a spectacle. But narratively, it was a train wreck. First, let's talk about the lack of answers. For years, the show teased us with questions about the Night King. What did he want? Was he targeting Bran because Bran was a three-eyed raven? Was his existence tied to the children of the forest? Did he have a plan beyond destruction? We never got any of that. He wasn't even given the dignity of a single line of dialogue to clarify his motives. He just walked forward, slowly, like a video game boss waiting for someone to hit the quick time event. Second, the battle itself. The strategies of the living made no sense. Sending the Dothraki to charge blindly into the darkness, parking the catapult in front of the trenches, having no fallback plan. These choices weren't just frustrating for fans. They undermined the sense of realism that made Game of Thrones so compelling in the first place. And then there was the Night King's behavior. This character we had been told was cunning, ancient, and unstoppable, suddenly reduced to strolling through the battlefield, barely lifting a finger. He didn't fight Jon, he didn't reveal his powers, he didn't show us why he was the greatest threat Westeros had ever faced. He just marched like a zombie in chief. And then, Arya. Don't get me wrong, Arya killing him was a cool moment visually. The jump, the dagger drop, it looked awesome. But narratively, it came out of nowhere. Arya had never been tied to the Night King in any meaningful way. Her arc was about revenge, about reclaiming her identity, about her kill list. She had no connection to this apocalyptic storyline. So when she dealt the final blow, it felt like shock value for shock value's sake. The bigger problem is what this death did to the entire mythology of the show. All the prophecies? Wasted. Jon Snow's destiny as the supposed chosen one? Meaningless. Bran's cryptic visions? Pointless. Years of setup, theories, and fan engagement all flushed away in one quick stab. It's not just that the Night King died, it's that his death robbed the show of its deeper meaning. He was hyped as the final boss, but ended up as a mid-season mini-boss. And once he was gone, the rest of the final season felt hollow because the true threat had already been written out of existence. What makes the Night King's downfall even worse is when you compare him to other great villains in TV history. Take Gus Fring in Breaking Bad. He's not supernatural, he doesn't raise the dead, but he's terrifying because of his intelligence, his precision, and his calm ruthlessness. Every action he took was layered with meaning, and his ending was shocking but narratively perfect. Or look at The Sopranos. Even the secondary villains were written with depth, motivation, and arcs that felt real. They didn't just appear and vanish, they left a mark on the story. Even within Game of Thrones, characters like Ramsay Bolton or Cersei had arcs that, while divisive, gave them purpose. Ramsay's cruelty led to a fitting downfall. Cersei's lust for power had a tragic yet thematically consistent end. But the Night King, though, he had none of that. No backstory, no dialogue, no motivation, no payoff. He was reduced to an empty symbol, a cool-looking villain who only existed to look menacing until it was time to shock the audience with a subversion. And that's the real tragedy here. The Night King could have been television's ultimate villain, the one everyone remembered for decades. He had the mystery of Sauron, the terror of Darth Vader, the inevitability of Thanos. But instead, he'll be remembered as the character who symbolized wasted potential. And when a villain that important collapses, it doesn't just ruin his arc, it drags down the entire story with him. For many fans, the Night King's anticlimactic ending wasn't just disappointing. It was the moment Game of Thrones itself collapsed. The Night King had all the pieces to become iconic. He had the build-up, the mystique, the power, the visual presence. For 8 seasons, he was the shadow looming over everything else. The wars for the throne were just distractions. The real war was always supposed to be against him. But instead of a grand climax, instead of a conclusion that tied together years of foreshadowing, he was dispatched in the most abrupt and anticlimactic way possible. And that choice didn't just waste a character, it wasted the theme of the show. Because at its heart, Game of Thrones wasn't just about politics or betrayal. It was about the fragility of humanity in the face of something bigger than all of us. The idea that while we fight each other for power, death is always coming. The Night King was that metaphor. And when his story collapsed, so did that central theme. That's why I say he wasn't just defeated by Arya. He was defeated in the writer's room. He wasn't killed by Dragonglass, but by rushed storytelling. So, here's the big question for you. Was the Night King's ending an unforgivable mistake? Or was it a bold twist that actually worked for you? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, hit subscribe, because here on Couch Bingers, we'll keep dissecting the best and the worst that television has to offer. See you in the next Couch Bingers.